So if you've been a member of our community for any period of time, you know that for many analysts that ask the question about career strategy, I always advise business analysts to try to specialize if they can. And in today's conversation, we're going to be talking about one area that business analysts can specialize in. Our guest today is somebody that I first ran across when I was on LinkedIn, and I ran across a group that is being run, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end. But anytime I run across practitioners, business analysis practitioners, I'm always keen to get their perspective on certain things. And our guest today has executed a project on RPA business analysis. That's going to be our subject today. Our guest has over 10 years of experience across a lot of different domains, a lot of different industries, public sector, private sector. He's done it all. And so I'm very happy to introduce Vijay Nair as our guest today. Welcome, Vijay.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time out of your incredibly busy schedule to join us today and lend us some of your expertise on projects that you've executed in the past. Is there anything that I missed in the intro? Anything else you'd like to add?
Nothing much. I think I'm sure we'll be able to pick some things up and talk a lot about that through this call. So.
All right, excellent. So let's just dive right into the subject matter at hand. I know that RPA business analysis has been getting a lot of attention recently, and since you've been on a project like this, I thought you would be the best person to go to try to help me understand and help some of our members understand what actually RPA business analysis is. So let's just start there. Can you help us understand what exactly RPA is?
Yeah, so RPA, which stands for Robotic Process Automation. So these are, think of it as a software version of robots that automate a lot of the processes in industries, basically.
Okay.
So that's a quick and easy definition. If you look up on Wikipedia, they call it also as, they term it as digital workers. So that's the other way of looking at it.
Okay, and just to be clear, these are not actual physical robots. These are all software robots that we're talking about, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So essentially, if I understand it correctly, then we have digital workers who are basically performing tasks that a human would normally be performing. And on an RPA project, I would imagine that as an analyst, you're helping to get this robot to figure out how to execute this task. Would that be a fair way of describing what RPA really is from a business analyst perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on over there. So I think that's the right way of looking at it. And I would add that it's also about automation, all about identifying repeatable tasks and automating the repeatable activities that we do that the staff do on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so repeatable activities. Gotcha. Now, on RPA projects, as business analysts and project professionals, we know that anytime we're on a project, we could be delivering a software solution that an employer or a client purchases, or they can build it in-house. Now, does that concept come into RPA? Are RPA solutions typically purchased, or are they homegrown? How does that actually work?
So RPA technologies, the way I like to look at an RPA solution is think of it as you've got two choices over here as an IT infrastructure team. Either you re-engineer the system, so you want these systems to be automated. You either re-engineer, use web services or all kinds of stuff to redo the whole system, or you put an overlay, as they call it, a layer of software on top of it. So the underlying technology does not really change. The systems that are what a human being will be doing, those things, the system don't change. What you're doing is adding this layer that normally a human being would be doing. It's the software layer that is put in that's doing exactly the same thing that a human being would be doing.
Oh, really? Okay. See, that's an aspect of RPA that even I didn't understand. So essentially what you're saying there is that if a certain system is in place today that the human users are using, RPA doesn't actually replace those systems at all. You're saying that you would have RPA as an additional layer on top of that. So let's imagine a company uses Oracle Financials to manage all its financials information. If you were to try to automate that process, you would not get rid of Oracle. You would not get rid of any of the user interfaces or anything like that. RPA would actually use those interfaces if you program them right. Is that a right way of saying it?
Yeah, so pretty much spot on. So that is exactly what is happening. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, fine. So there are lots of companies out there who claim to do a lot more than just that. So they might say that they are re-engineering some of the stuff and doing this. But that's not the RPA component. The RPA is just the overlay part that is doing the same thing that a human being would do. Basically.
Okay. Okay.
If they claim that they're doing a lot more than that, that's actually because it's their brand. They're offering more than what an RPA is actually doing. So because there are some pros and cons to the problem of implementing RPA solution, which we can talk about. As well.
Okay. Okay.
Going back to you,
yeah. Go ahead.
Going back to your, I think the question on the providers out there. So the top leaders in RPA world, we have Blue Prism, we have UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Work Fusion. So these 4 providers are seen as the top leaders as far as Gartner. If you look up on the Gartner's website in their quadrant,
right,
you see these guys as the top providers.
Okay. Okay. So on the Gartner's Magic Quadrant, you're saying that there are 4 major providers of RPA. So RPA solutions really are always purchased. They're never really homegrown. So if anybody wants to engage in an RPA project, they would go to presumably one of the 4 vendors that we've mentioned there: Blue Prism, I think UiPath, and there's 2 more which I'll list out. But so they would go to one of these vendors. They would procure the software, and then as an analyst, you would get involved there to try to help configure that software, I'm assuming, to get it to do what it is that it needs to do. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Of course, okay. You also have some open source technologies out there. Don't get me wrong, there are open source technology. If you don't want to pay the money for these guys, you probably look for open source. The UiPath itself is a type of a free version. Gotcha. Community edition they have. So you do that. For mega players out there, the more likely I think they have the budget to implement RPA, so they will go with one of the top leaders.
Understood. So they're never homegrown. Then it's always purchased. I'm getting from that, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay. That is great. Can you give us an idea of some of the responsibilities and some of the deliverables that a business analyst would produce on an RPA project?
So the RPA project, at least I can talk about the project that I was part of, and in the work that I did for a consulting firm, Accenture, the work we did was looking at the banking sector and identifying, for example, the mortgage, how they would produce mortgage letters as part of the whole end-to-end process. So, okay. So in this scenario, as a business analyst, you'd start off right in the beginning of this journey, the discovery phase, where we're identifying what are the existing systems that the staff are involved in producing the XYZ activities. So this is where it can get a little blurry for the business analyst, because when you're looking at this end-to-end user journey, just like any other business analyst would go there, identifying the as-is story. What's the end-to-end user journey from using all these different systems? You need to now isolate the bit that is, after you identify the full picture, you've got to now scrutinize the one part of the process that's actually going to be automated as agreed by the business, by the budget holders. So this is where we're going to, look into it, look at what's the as-is journey, how many systems are involved, keep a track on all, whatever BA toolkit you're using, use that to action the as-is journey.
Okay.
Now at this point, we're doing a little bit more than what the BA would do. which is do what we call as volumetrics, where after some specific data around the what's it called, FTE, full-time equivalent. So
okay, around FTEs, you're saying. Okay.
FTEs, yeah.
Okay.
So because the idea here is also depends on what software you're using, but the idea here is you're trying to calculate how much percentage of the work that a human being is doing on a daily basis is going to be automated.
Okay.
Yeah. So
these are metrics basically you're getting around whether, so I would imagine that this would be more of when you're trying to make the business case for RPA and you do some analysis work around what you can and cannot automate, you're essentially, if I'm getting this right, you're essentially trying to determine how much FTE savings you would have from implementing the project. So this is all pre-project, I'm assuming? Okay.
Well, I mean, it's part of the discovery. It's part of before you even go into the implementation, you need to get data. Data is very important before you go in.
Got it.
There's two, I mean, the way I see it, there's all, the other reason why this data is also important is because of the software you use. Like, for example, I can't talk about the other software. For Blue Prism, they actually charge you by the number of robots, the software robots that you pay into. So that's the other reason why you really need to get to that numbers level. How much of it are you actually automating? That accordingly, you need to figure out how much you're saving. Is it justifiable that you're going to deploy 3 robots, for example, to do X amount of processes, as opposed to a human being, the labor cost of that person? It's going to cost more to buy that robot than
so it's like
human.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act, it seems like, right? You're essentially, if you're getting charged by the robot, you really have to do some upfront analysis work to figure out, okay, how much can we automate? How many FTE savings is that going to give us? And then in order to automate that, and I'm just making this up as I go, just imagine how it works. But in order for us to automate that, how many robots would we have to purchase from Blue Prism or from whoever else the vendor is to implement that, and what is the cost of that? And so your cost benefit essentially is how much FTE savings do we have versus how much the robotics cost is going to have, and then that is going to help you decide whether the project's even worthwhile taking on. Does that sound right?
Okay. So that analysis is very important.
So
there's that part of the puzzle. Then we need to also once you start going into the process, identifying the processes, gathering, creating the process map, all of the activities that you do to identify your process journey. Once you start building that, you then you're really you're using the RPA in the back of your mind as you start analyzing this data that you collected, this active journey. Because what you're now going to be looking at is how much of those tasks that you listed down are actually repeatable, as I mentioned earlier. How much of this is like, it's just a routine, click, to go there, maybe open an Excel document, pull data from one database and pour it into the Excel sheet, and then attach it in an email and send it out to X client. You could be doing the same task over and over and over again. So let's automate that process. The robot will pull the data from the database, put it in a sheet, and send it out to a list of email addresses that you would have captured it in a separate place for it to pick the data. So this kind of repeatable task. If you're going to be doing this repeatable task, this is where you need to really analyze how much of this the robot can actually do, and how much of this requires, as we call it in RPA world, the exceptions.
The exceptions. Okay, so essentially, if I was to summarize that, you would say that when you're actually implementing the software, you're going through and you're trying to do deep analysis on how much of the materials you're saying are repeatable tasks. So these are things that a robot could quite easily do without much judgment, without much human judgment, without much any kind of complex thinking is required. Those are the areas where you focus on the most. So things like, I think you said correspondence, if you need to send out a letter and you're just pulling in data from different places, that's a very repeatable task. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so those are the type of things that you would target if you're trying to automate the most, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The next step in that stage would be then for the analyst to do what after you've identified those.
Yeah. So now that you identified how much of that is repeatable, you also need to take into consideration. So that's why you're looking at the whole data. You're splitting that, identifying the repeatable one, and then you're identifying the ones that are not repeatable. So those, because you need to keep a record of those exception points. Because the robot, you need to train the robot to say, right, so at this point, the whole journey, we need to throw out an exception to say, the human needs to look at it and do some research, judgmental, create data processing, doing some extra thinking over there, and then feeding it back into the process. This is the back and forth thing that happens over there. The robot will inform the user to say, all right, this activity needs your input.
Got it.
I get an alert. Maybe I'm the staff, so I get the alert and say, okay, I've been informed I need to do something, analyze it. All right, so I'll take some time to do all the analysis. All right, put it back into the system. The robot will do that and continue that process flow journey. That's why you're going to be documenting the process flow in and out, where you're going to throw exceptions and where you're going to take it and continue the journey. That cycle happens in that.
Right. So as the robot is executing and it runs into places where it can't figure it out, it notifies the human, and that's the process mapping that you're doing essentially is where does the robot throw the exception? Where does the person come in? What do they do? And then hand things back over to the robot. That's the process flow that you produce. Okay.
Exactly.
And then after you do that, then does the analyst typically get involved in actually configuring the robots themselves, or is that an activity that happens more by technical folks on the project?
So this is where it is the decision of which technology you're using. So for instance, if you're using, so I can talk more about Blue Prism side of things. You're using Blue Prism, they've got those Object Studio and the Process Studios that help you to actually design everything. At this point, you may have used a pen and paper or online mock-up diagram or to draft your whole diagram. Now you're just copying and putting it inside the studio, the whole the process flow, the new journey basically. And you identified what the exceptions are, what the repeatable. Now that's your to-be journey. So that to-be has been drafted inside the studio. And at this point, pretty much, I think at this point it's like a self-service activity where a DA can get involved in doing that. If that's what the job spec requires you to do. So,
so you can't get involved in, so this is, sorry to cut you off. So this is a stage where you would basically, you say you have like a studio tool where you would enter in some of the information around how the robot is supposed to function. And that's something an analyst can do, you're saying?
Yeah, they can get involved easily. I think I can't say upfront that this is the necessity, because it really depends on the software choice, because that also is not as easy as that. Gotcha. And then it also depends on, because remember, there's also going to be some scripts here behind the scenes that might have to be modified. And how comfortable are you to go deep end into it it's kind of a decision.
Right. And so some business analysts might be a little bit more technical. They may be more of a business systems analyst who might be more comfortable going in and modifying scripts, whereas other analysts on even RPA projects might say, hey, look, that's more of a technical person's job. And, if they don't have the skills or the comfort, they would leave things off a little bit earlier, right?
That's right.
Understood. If, are there certain areas, I know you mentioned a few minutes ago around where your project with Accenture was in the banking domain and specifically under mortgages, where you're looking at dealing or automating some of the correspondence and the letters that go out. So I'm assuming that would be, in general, that would be an area of a business or a domain that is very good to apply RPA on. Are there other areas, other domains that are better for executing RPA projects than others? Can you help us understand that a little bit?
Yeah. So I mean, I believe the other industries are things like the customer service, for example.
Customer service?
Right. That's I see an obvious choice where RPA can be implemented because there's a lot of email exchange, for example. There's the same routine response given to X amount of people that could be automated using RPA technology.
Okay.
Those kind of correspondence. RPA, it's worth noting though, RPA is most of it is actually electronic correspondence. It's not the phone personal assistant type.
Right.
It's purely desktop experience.
Yeah. So sending emails, sending letters electronically. That's the type of correspondence
that's the type of that you would need. But there are some things that can be a bit challenging when I think about it. For example, you think that scanning a document could be automated using RPA. But what I've noticed, at least in the projects that I was part of, is that the scanning actually requires a human being to step in and do a little bit more than that, because these could be handwritten documents. It's just handwritten piece of paper and then scanned it and gone into the computer. So the data, the RPA is not intelligent enough. This is not AI, by the way. This RPA and AI are two different things, because there is no the RPA is never going most of it is not going to be able to understand the data inside that scanned document. So you need a human being, throw it out as an exception, let the human being interpret the data that's inside that scanned document and put it back into the RPA flow.
Understood. Okay. Now, if there are business analysts who are interested in specializing in RPA, are there any steps that they can take? Is there anything that you can offer us in terms of some of the things that they should be doing to start moving in the direction of RPA?
I think, well, first starting point is knowing more about the technology itself. Be aware, as I mentioned, these are the four top leaders out there. Try to learn. I mean, many of these softwares are free to download and experience the feeling of knowing what's involved. So get a feel of getting a trial version of that software. Try it out on your own computer. Try to come up with a use case. If you're not there. I think there's so many use cases now. You look around us. How many times have you been sending out the same email to X or Z people? How many times have you done repeated things on your desktop? Your desktop is a great place to apply that RPA to test it out and see what if I could do the same thing using the RPA? And it's a great way to just practice and keep practicing.
Yeah. So these softwares you say are free to download, and you can install it on your own computer. And that seems like it would be the best way to try to understand what RPA actually is, understand its capabilities, understand its limitations. Just install it on your own computer and start tinkering with it as much as you possibly can to try to understand the tools. That would be the best way to do it, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, most softwares are, I would say maybe there are some exceptions. They give you a limit in the amount of features or things you can do in software. But I mean, it really comes down to how comfortable you are in going deeper and deeper into this. Choosing.
Understood. Now, just on the back end of things, so we've talked about business case and trying to justify the cost of implementing a project. We talked a little bit about what an analyst does in order to implement it. When we hit the testing stage of the project, is there anything that really changes from traditional projects as an RPA project? So in traditional projects, oftentimes you'll have a dedicated QA team who builds software scripts that they would be at the computer and they would be basically executing those scripts. You have some automated testing tools that lets them automate some of that. But on RPA projects, does that really change a whole lot? Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, so the way I see it, the testing part of it, again, this is dependent on the software provider. So if again, going back to Blue Prism, if you are using if you're looking at it from a testing perspective, the testing over here is the fact that you've got a staging environment, you deployed assuming that you created the whole process flow and everything, now you're deploying it inside your staging environment, seeing how much of the processes you would have created your test conditions, just like any other testing practice. Create your test conditions, use cases, deploy the software, how much success rate has happened your expected success rate for this robot. You can use all of that using a QA environment as well. I think that's, it's fairly easy, not easy, but fairly a possible.
Standard. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't change a whole lot from what we would do on any other type of a project. Yeah. Is what I'm gathering.
That's
okay.
Right.
Okay. Great. So I want to thank you, Vijay, for joining us today. If any of our members want to learn more about you and the great LinkedIn group that you and Simon have started, can you tell us a little bit more about where we can, our members can find you?
Sure. Yeah, so we started, myself and my colleague Simon started this LinkedIn group called the BA Video Series.
BA Video Series, okay.
Yes, so you can just, you can search hashtag BA Video Series all in one word.
Sure, I'll put that up on the screen, and I'll also include a link for you. So BA Video Series, hashtag on LinkedIn, that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
So if you do that, you'll be able to see the group, and then you can join it as well. But the intention of these groups, so early on we thought that to make the most out of the engagement that we have with our audience, the best way to get them engaged was actually to share real world project experiences, just like how I'm talking about this project. I tend to anchor many of the LinkedIn Live seminars and get different speakers to talk about different topics. So each week we'll talk about a specific topic, and we'll have 2 or 3 speakers share their project experiences about that topic and give some nuggets of wisdom to the BA community to understand, like, this is what the real world working knowledge, working approach is in XYZ projects, basically. So that's what the intention of these groups are.
And I got to say I'm such a huge advocate, and anytime I see practitioners talking about real world projects, I'm a huge supporter of that. And part of the reason why I am is because there is so much noise, for lack of a better word, out on the internet about the BA profession. And there's so much that, there's a lot of blog posts, there are a lot of videos that an aspiring business analyst could be going through, but a lot of, from my own personal experience in the space, I see that there's really a lot of people who don't really have the experience, but are still not too shy from giving people advice. So that's why I'm always very happy to see practitioners bringing real world experience to audience members, to aspiring business analysts. So what you and Simon are doing there is great. And I am going to encourage everybody to go over to that group and join and listen to practitioners talk about business analysis practice, right? Some of the conversations that even I've listened to, what I really like about it is that you don't really sugarcoat what happens on the ground, right? A lot of the learning that business analysts will do is a lot of your learning doesn't really come from having an overly idealistic or an overly pretty picture of what the profession's about. A lot of your learning comes from knowing what things can go wrong, and having those types of conversations, I think is very valuable. And I've heard a lot of those types of things being discussed in the conversations that you've had. So thank you for starting the group. I wish you both much success, and to all of our members and anybody else listening to this, I'm going to heavily encourage you to head over to LinkedIn and make sure you're joining that group. Thank you again, Vijay, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Iman. Thank you.
Okay.